Hey guys, like I did last time for the last chapter, I just wanted to go over the last fan fiction chapter, just because a lot of work goes into these, and there's a lot of things that people might miss, and it's just kind of fun to talk about how these things came together. So we start off with the envoy, and I know that when we when I put out the call for chapter submissions, I'd used the emissary. And both words are used in Ice and Fire. Emissary very rarely, though, while Envoy is used much more. And so I think in the end we went with Envoy. Um, I mean, I guess Emissary is more like you're officially part of some sort of like country or city. But then again, I mean, I guess he's part of Dorne, but envoy just seemed to fit better. I think it was the word that was used with Jamie and Blackfish, which kind of brought me over to that camp. So that's how that kind of switched over. But there was some discussion actually with the envoy and named chapters of whether or not um, the character always had to be in the position at the start of the chapter to for it to count. So, for example, the King's Prize, like Asha isn't captured mid chapter. She starts out as the King's Prize. She starts out the beginning of the next chapter thinking of herself as the sacrifice. She doesn't become the sacrifice halfway through. And that was kind of the thing with this envoy. Is envoy even appropriate? Because Hotah doesn't become the envoy until halfway through the chapter. And I think the only example of somebody becoming the title mid chapter is actually Arya. I think she becomes the ugly little girl mid chapter, but one could argue that Arya always felt she was the ugly little girl. So it's anyway, but nonetheless, it didn't come up with anything better than the envoy. So the envoy was just was there. So maybe we broke the rules a little by having Hotah become the envoy later rather than starting out as the envoy. These little things that we think about and talk about, like with the editors, it's just there's so many little things like that. Um, the obelisk drank the morning light. This came from I kind of knew that I wanted to make High Hermitage super old, even and so and one of the submissions had mentioned had made a was about seeing Karen's as he walked up, as Hotah walked up, and I just kind of the idea kind of melded together that I knew I wanted something very old going on, so I wanted kind of the black oily stones that we read about in the World of Ice and Fire, and then and I just kind of replaced the Karens with the black obelisk, um, and drinking the light is just so George R. R. Martin. He uses the term drinking light, drinking candlelight, drinking daylight, drinking morning light, drinking moonlight. Like he uses it all the time. So it's not. I actually don't think it's the best way to start. But I couldn't think of any other like gripping way to kind of pull people in. Um, One thing that I kind of being my own critic here is I created all of this creepy environment of this being like this ancient uh, land, but at the same time like most of the characters are pretty funny, and so it doesn't really have the mood of being creepy and old, even though um, that's that's where they are. Which Jorgen the Giant Slayer comes in and says an old place, which kind of harks to back to the Fist of the First Men and it being an old place. Jorgen the Giant Slayer. This is of course a reference to um, Godry Faring being the Giant Slayer over in the north. Um, and of course, like if you pay attention to the story, Jorgen got his name from killing um, uh, the Krakal. And so later on, we're told the stories of how the couple people get these these names. Um, and so the horses are nickering, and then I knew wanted the Knight of Lemonwood to kind of be. I needed to give him some sort of personality, so we made him very kind of sarcastic. I actually had to dial back the sarcasm. People were like, "Dude, you can't be sarcastic every line." I was like, "Okay, okay." So he dialed that back a little bit, but I still like him a lot. I think he's quite funny. Um, Especially like you can tell the prince all about this fearsome rock. And then Obara crested the ridge. A lot of people putting in submissions did not want Obara to die. They thought that Obara had a good future, but I knew I needed something. I needed something significant um, to happen. I needed, people need to die. Sacrifices need to happen for things to be powerful. Um, and then we kind of get this environment of the mountains and everything. I actually kind of wish there was more description of the mountains and everything. It might be just because I kind of like desert mountains. Like I've been to Morocco and I had a really great time, and I was just imagining the Anti-Atlas Mountains when trying to put this together. Um, and so this line here, man, it's almost funny. She looked worse than yesterday, and yesterday she looked half a corpse. Like how many times that line switched and changed, and what George would use and stuff like that. One thing I noticed that is seeping in, because there are some subtle differences between kind of like what um, I like and what the editors like in writing style, and what George does. Like George actually doesn't do as much repetition, and I really like repetition in writing, but he doesn't actually do it very much. So this line, she looked worse than yesterday, and yesterday she looked half a corpse, probably wouldn't be something George would necessarily write, but I don't think it's too noticeable right there. Just because he wouldn't necessarily use yesterday twice in the same sentence. But um, so her ribs had been broken by Balon in the desert, um, and some wound lingered within, rotting her from the inside out. I think that's what's actually killing Obara is a ruptured spleen. Um, and I did a lot of reading on what would happen to one with a ruptured spleen, and there's quite a few things actually. So most of the time, if a spleen ruptures, you die pretty quick though. But there's a few things that could happen to her that would let her live the couple weeks that she was living here. Um, and there's a lot of these little things like sometimes it doesn't even sound like George, but it is George. For instance, like find a maester. Like you'd think that this would be like seek a maester or something more official, but weirdly, like there's certain lines that George says that are simpler, and find a maester is one of them. It's really odd. It's really odd. We spent a lot of time trying to match George's style and stuff. And sometimes it's like unbelievable. You're like, wait, it's find a maester, not like seek out a maester. No, it's find a maester. Um, so then I had a lot of the spearmen hail from Lemonwood as this kind of sort of like uh, reason for Sir Desil to naturally become the leader, but it later undoes it that that Hotah actually takes them all away pretty easily in the end. So it actually doesn't really matter that they're all from Lemonwood. So it's kind of this setup, and then for to be undone. The so um so I really this is it's Sir Desil being sarcastic. The earth is level here. He lied. The gods favor of this gift of respite. Um, he has very playful language, and we tried to make sure that he wanted to be playful. And then he of course takes the scrape sword's blade, which is this constant reminder of the scrape sword, this like blade that exists that's always jangling in our story. Um, so um, so I know in the call for submissions, I'd asked for a good horse name, and we got a whole bunch of different ones, and one of them was Mirror, which um, And maybe the submission meant it to be for Hotah looking at himself, like, Mirror. What we've done here in the story is that Mirror is not only like named after um, uh, Serwyn and the Mirror Shield and Sir Byron Swan. It's obviously supposed to also be, when Hotah looks at the mirror, he sees a reflection of himself, like, morally. And so, it wasn't very explicit in the submission that mentioned mirror, but when I saw that horse name, I was like, no, that we can definitely use that. And so there was a long evolution on what happened with Hotah's horse. Um, you know, and it becoming more symbolically important. I think, I didn't think it was going to be so symbolically important. I thought it was going to be some sort of like throwaway joke, kind of like, you know, Jaime Lannister being on a horse named Honor. I don't know, like, if Jaime really thinks about honor that much because of the horse. Like, I almost feel like Honor is named that way just so there's that joke in the middle of his him treating with the blackfish, where he says, do you know what honor is? And he's like, a horse, and he thinks in his head, a horse. Um, so I liked the mirror being this reflection of Hotah's morality, and that being like part of the whole thing. Um, and him thinking himself ugly, and it being ambiguous on whether or not he's thinking himself physically ugly, or morally internally ugly. Um, then I thought, also with this mirror, it would be very interesting if mirrors, like, Hotah just didn't have them. And I don't think mirrors were actually very common in the Middle Ages. Uh, so in general, it's actually not that it's ridiculous, like, today, for someone to never have a mirror around. But in the Middle Ages, you wouldn't necessarily have mirrors too much. Um, and so I thought this would be an interesting thing to kind of go back in time and learn more about Hotah when he was among the bearded men and things like that, and what they would have taught him, with regards to obedience. And then it just kind of grew, like, all of a sudden, like, Mirror could be this tell, to Darkstar and things like that, of that he perhaps killed Balon Swan because he's got his horse and stuff like that. So it ended up, when I included that, give the horse a good name, and then it came back, and Mirror was there, and all the ideas that came from that, and how much it grew and became an integral part of the story is really quite fun. Because I never imagined that the horse would be so integrated. Um, and then queer name for the horse, called out Pate of the Shadow City. Man, a lot of time was spent on, like, trying to figure out if Shadow City would be capital or lowercase, because Shadow City is actually lowercase in the story, which is really weird. But I think if it's part of one's name, if it's part of a name, it would then become capitalized. Um, and so, we get into this story of the dragons, and the confusion over over which dragon Sir Byron was actually attacking. And I always kind of felt that it was one of the submissions had this in it. So, you know, they recognized that I had the theory that Tyrion was wrong, and that it was actually Vhagar the whole time. And so, Reginald here, the Goblin Butcher, um, believes it's Vhagar. The Goblin Butcher, he of course gets his name later on. You find out that he's called the Goblin Butcher because he hacked to pieces the Slint Boys, and that's got because they turned out to be rock goblins, according to the story. Um, so anyway, this was all fun, and that's the thing is. This is all, like, these are really fun conversations, and in a sense, they take away all the, like, the creepy environment, which is just kind of forgotten. So if so I think I kind of failed on having a creepy environment because the conversation was just too much fun. That everybody like I really love all the dialogue, but you know, if everybody's having a great time in dialogue, you're not really thinking about the setting. Um, and we have a little joke about the one-eyed kinslayer. What was his name? Bloodraven. I think it was on my mind, the Bloodraven and one-eyed kinslayer thing, because I'd made the joke in my videos on House of the Dragon that there's just so many. There's George R. Martin just uses the one-eyed trope, the one-eyed badass trope so much that it's there. So. Um, of course, there's also a little joke here about you'd make a fine Maester Pate, because Pate being the acolyte or the from the prologue of A Feast for Crows, and then we figured this would be a good time to do a little flashback, and like somebody, there's this flashback about the dragon and dead men, and I was like, well, we might as well do like an others versus dragons kind of thing. And it's like, well, who's gonna bring that story up? Well, we can have Hotah, because remembering Oberyn, and Sorella, why not? Two characters that I love that need more time and background. And then I figured, Hotah's the type of person that shouldn't be able to read, just like Davos. So I thought that would be neat to add in that he's illiterate. Because something we never think about, like, can Hotah read? I don't know. Doesn't seem like he should be able to read. So let's make it so he can't. Just kind of a fun little addition. Why not? Then the horses. This is so one of the submissions had a long thing about the ghosts, and being haunted, and the riders feeling the ghosts are riding on the riderless horses and stuff like that. So then it's like, well, then it kind of expanded to everybody having kind of PTSD from the attack and things like that. I had to like look up, like, how does one actually carry horses, or travel with horses, and what is it called? And it's like researching pack strings is what I eventually found, like, as the thing. Like, it's amazing, like these little tangents you go down, like, oh well, how would one transport horses? Like, oh, you put them in pack strings. Okay, all right. And then let's see. We then get to the numbers of how many dead and how many are alive. Thankfully, I think in the original call for chapters, I did a calculation on how many people, and it doesn't really matter how many there are. Like, rough estimates could be fine. So so it's fine. Then there's a lot of different ideas in the submissions about what happens to all of to the bodies. Like, would they bother burying them? Would they burn them? Would they how much care would they give to getting rid of evidence of a slaughter like that? And in the end, I just figured, they probably wouldn't care that much. They'd probably just be like, and just let the sand blow over them. So that kind of happened. I actually once attended a funeral in the Middle East, and 10 men can dig a grave in the sand in probably 60 seconds, 2 minutes. It's amazing, like, how fast you can dig a grave in sand, and then how fast you can bury the person. It's because Middle Eastern funerals have to happen within the first, like, 2 days, and it's really kind of an awkward situation, because the the people are not in a state to be holding a funeral or anything like that. But I think it's to try to keep their minds off everything by making them try to organize a funeral really fast, and everybody kind of comes, and they're in no state of meeting people, but everything has to happen so quickly, and the people are buried so quickly. So then, we had a lot of flashbacks. A lot of the submissions had flashbacks, and then I realized like this is just taking too long, and flashing, like, it would be a lot more interesting if we had it from the mouth of one of the spearmen. And so it kind of have like him telling this like fantastic tale of wargs and skin changers, which is, kind of goes back to the Red Wedding, where people thought there were wargs there. I mean, there were wargs there, but yeah, but how they accused Robb Stark of being a werewolf, and also like wargs and skin changers is a Cersei line. So it was just kind of fun to think like, oh, what if like, they have their own little story, because the same thing happened to the Red Wedding, where it's just these fantastic tales came out of it. So, Sir Merlin becomes the giant, and Sir Tanton becomes a devil, and the Slint Boys become rock goblins and stuff like that. So I think it worked out a lot better to have it told in this like fantastic telling than to actually flash back. So then, Danos. I think a lot of submissions had Danos surviving. It was just like almost too much for them to accept that Danos, like this little kid, would be murdered. And a couple of submissions wanted him to be kind of a squire for Hotah, kind of a Podrick Payne kind of stand-in. And it's not that wouldn't have been interesting, but I just couldn't logically accept that they would allow the kid to survive and like spill the beans. Like that was it. Like, yeah, it would be much more, it'd be very interesting to have Danos continue on and be a squire for Areo Hotah. That'd be a very interesting situation. But then I was just like, I really thought about it. I was like, how can I logically have him survive and no one care? And like, considering that he knows that they murdered everybody. And I just couldn't come up with anything. So I was like, okay, it's too bad. So instead Danos is just going to be this ghost for Hotah, because I couldn't think of any logical way to keep him alive. And then, so of course, Sir Timon survives, have him go off into the desert. So just kind of kicking the can down the road if we're going to keep Sir Timon alive. It's sort of like the Knight of Seashells, right? Like, did the Knight of Seashells like make it? Well, who knows? If the story needs him to be alive, he's alive. If the story needs him to be dead, he's dead. So the script sword survives. And so then they go off into the mountains, and we have them meet different farmers. And I always kind of knew that the farmers were going to be purple-eyed, just because they live in the same area as the Danes. But then I started thinking about it, and I was like, actually, that makes a lot of sense. That that if they were first men, they were like way back in the day, they would be practicing the Lord's Rite of the First Night, and so all people in the area would have the purple eyes, just like they did on Dragonstone or Driftmark and stuff like that. So this idea is that these Dane genes are still floating around in the locals. Some people think it means that like Darkstar was like banging the locals. But I don't think Darkstar specifically. But I was just thinking of that it was Danes, a history of Danes like practicing Lord's Rite to the First Night and stuff like this. And this mystery of whether or not Darkstar is a good person or not. How he doesn't tax his people because they don't have very much, and he doesn't want to like burden them. But then again, also like um it was suggested because Dornish law is going to be a part of the story later on. Um, like this is going someplace. We kind of put in this line that Dornish law forbids lords to tax their subjects amid famine, um, because we do need reminders that Dornish law exists, and Dornish law means a lot of things. Like we kind of think of Dornish law as specifically, oh, women can inherit, have equal rights to inheritance as men. If the eldest woman would inherit, but Arion reads an entire book like on Dornish law, so there must be much more to it. We don't hear too much about what the rest of Dornish law is, except for one of Aegon II's bastards tries to demand a bunch of he tries to lead a rebellion and has a bunch of like social program demands, and they say, oh, it was like the influence of his Dornish wife or something, his Dornish lover. So there seems to be something related to um, um, good treatment, like social justice kind of aspects to Dornish law. So we included that because we need more reminders that it exists, and we're not going to get many if Hotah is going to leave Dorne, So in all, 2 horses have been traded to the small folk. Oh, also like we put the farmer in the tall stone house surrounded by rocky fields to make a reference to the house with the red door possibilities. Um, Lemon Tree was perhaps a bit too on the nose, so it changed a bit from lemons to oranges, and I eventually settled on limes as the citrus fruit that the tree was. Um, and then okay, how many people can are there to take on Darkstar? How many people are left? 40 fit for battle. Um, there's a lot of thought put into like how many people can it really take to um, like take on a landed knight, because it does seem, because even when you think of George like uh, and sending off Beric Dondarrion with his 100 men to take out uh, Gregor Clegane, like would they have even been successful? Like say they made it all the way to his keep, would they have been able to like you know attack the keep and pull him out? I don't even think so. It's just it all seems kind of ridiculous. Like would those in the end, we find out there's only 5 people in there, but could 5 people inside a castle keep 100 people out? They might have a shot. Like it's um so I don't, the more I think about the realism of castle warfare and siege warfare, I realize like, oh, it's just so difficult to figure out like how many people. Depends on the castle, right? Depends on like on the people in it and how it's set up. But nonetheless, here we're in a situation where they had 40 and they were scared they weren't going to be able to take the castle with 40. Anyway, the scout comes, great success. Remind me to knight you on the morrow. Desil is being sarcastic again. His horse must have been a goat. Mayhaps it was a unicorn. When originally I put that line in, I was thinking about the ancient animal in which like that. There's this ancient animal that George actually has be the real unicorns on Skagos, and what is it? Unicorn. I don't know if I'm gonna find it, but like, yeah, it's this like weird Siberian unicorn, and when I put in the line, I was actually thinking that that animal was much like a goat, but it's not really like a goat. So I was confusing a memory because there were some breeding of goats that people used to do to make them look like unicorns or something. But nonetheless, the line stayed. Mayhaps it was a unicorn. Um, and so then we get to High Hermitage, and High Hermitage is, it's a fun little place. I kind of always knew it was going to be this like pale um, uh, castle, and so a lot of entries had some pretty cool descriptions of everything. Um, and so if it was a pale castle, but I also wanted the relics, the ancient relics of like the black oily stone as like a base that it was built upon. But then I was like, oh, that actually makes it look like Darkstar, right? Like Darkstar has silver hair and a black streak, and so like High Hermitage actually like is like Darkstar. It's got a little bit of this one little black block, large black block, and the rest is pale. So, um, but yeah, a lot of great submissions had the descriptions of everything. There was some discussion about like how high would High Hermitage be? Would there be snow? Would there be greenery? What was it like? And I kind of just was thinking of the Anti-Atlas Mountains in Morocco and everything kind of being dry and or and something like that. So we didn't put it too high. We still get this Torrentine tributary, um, which I don't even think George uses tributary in his writing. The World of Ice and Fire, I think, uses it, but there was no better word for it, so we use that. But um, and then this idea that the sluice gate like river run, but then later we had the idea like the sluice gate never worked anyway. They could it was um and then there's this discussion about um it using half towers. So for some reason in Ice and Fire there aren't any half towers where the inside is open. And I think it's the advantage of the inside being open is just that you're fighting on the outside, and then if you're taken, you can turn around and easily attack people in your courtyard. Plus, it's a lot cheaper. You only have to build half the tower. In the end, the only function of the half tower is for Desil to turn around and be able to like see everything. The um, which is useful, but that's really the only reason it's there is that High Hermitage has half towers so that narratively speaking, Desil can turn around and see the defenses. But I think it's just like a fun. It is still just fun to make it a different kind of castle. Uh yeah, and then we added in here that that it was ancient, green seer looking over the lands, and then we kind of had some Dane history. A lot of people went into some serious Dane history, and so this is part of the relic of this. That is that um, that what's the history of High Hermitage? That maybe when Vorian Dayne, who was the last king of the Torrentine, when he was replaced by I think Davos Dayne, what happened to his son? And so they're like, well, let's give him High Hermitage. And so we had this like split of really High Hermitage being the real Danes, like they're they were usurped, um, and that would add some extra tension of on the Sword of the Morning title. But also Vorian Dade was called Sword of the Evening, so they're like, oh, well, if we pass it over to High Hermitage and his son, then we could claim that High Hermitage is the Sword of the Evening. And that's when Darkstar gives his fake titles, that's one of them. But it's not really established if like he's really Sword of the Evening or anything like that, or if that was just Vorian Dane's name. Um, let's see. There was no wood. Man, a lot of thought into this like wood, and like okay, I suppose it wouldn't take that long. It'd take about a day for people to go down and grab wood and bring them up for siege towers and ladders and rams and stuff like that. So it wasn't. They're chilling out here for a few days, so it's not. It was no problem. Um, and then one of the submissions, yeah, it was kind of funny. I love the. It's very subtle about the mule thing. Uh, one of the submissions had this like, yeah, the girl on the moat's edge was indeed seated on a mule. So this idea that this guy's like a mule, and he's getting all excited about this mule, and then this line, yeah, we got there, and she was indeed seated on a mule. Like I really liked it for some reason. Um, but then how did she get out? And so I doing research about like side sally ports and stuff like that. That she went out of side sally port and like climbed in and out of the moat. In fact, I think actually her being able to ride in and out of the moat made me make the castle's moat dry, which then with the sluice gate, I was like, well, why would Darkstar have the sluice gate closed? Oh well, how about it's just broken? So I think actually like the girl on a mule led to the fun aspect of the sluice gate being broken the whole time. And then of course it's he thinks it's Marcella, and we have haunted violet eyes, which is a callback to Ashara Dayne. Um, and then the long titles, and it was funny. These titles are kind of funny because obviously I don't think Gerald Dayne has any titles at all, but he's just kind of making stuff up to screw with people. But Knight of High Hermitage, Sword of the Evening, which would come from Vori and Dayne. Guardians of the Red Caves were like, why not? Maybe there's red caves back there. Memory of the First Net, why not? Protector of the Old Source, Keeper of the Opal Scroll. I think it was originally Opal Codex, and it turns out there's a company called Opal Codex, so we just Opal Scroll. The and then we get to Tansy, and this kind of came out of some discussion. Her name is Tansy. Like, should there be some sort of like mention of tea? And it's like, well, yeah, okay. Because originally he's like, oh, you're a little kid, like, um, yeah, ca- are you here to negotiate? Like, I can give you some dolls, like, and then it's like, well, playing at tea is a very kid thing. So like, you kind of get that reference of the Tansy tea to play at tea. I can offer you 3 quarry for our $3 for our quarry, Fiend Darkstar. Um, and then the Rotten Lemon with Desil Dalt, and the idea that she calls him Sir. So there's so in Ice and Fire, it's really the status of a landed knight is really weird, right? Because like you're kind of a lord in the sense that you own land and you collect taxes and things like this, but you're not called a lord. You're just a landed knight, and so people call you Sir. So even Gregor Clegane who is a landed knight, like he gets called Sir, and so like we have her calling him Sir, as if she thinks it's his name. Like the idea with like Gregor Clegane's like knights is they don't, or his the mountain's men, is they don't even understand that his name is actually Gregor. They think his name is Sir because they're stupid. So we kind of have this like same idea that like that she thinks maybe Gerald Dayne's name is Sir. So she does the same with as they do with the mountain's men. The girl's a brat. Leave her to me. This is some brutal discussion from the Giant Slayer. I think originally it was about him like passing her around the camp, and so we walked it back to just being the Giant Slayer, wanting to do whatever to the poor girl. But this line is in here for a while. I had no idea you aspired to be a eunuch, and this actually, the Knight of Lemonwood, even though he went along with Obara's plans, and he's not as bad. Like I think he only had a couple lines in the previous chapter, but he heard this. One of them was he heard the story in in the Hellhold about uh, uh, Rhaenys the Conqueror, like being a prisoner there and being raped by the Ullers, and he was like, and he had a problem with that story. So, the idea is that the that Desil is not that bad of a guy, despite having to go along with Obara's plan. And I think if we're really psychoanalyzing Sir Desil, he doesn't he doesn't want the command, and he kind of surrenders with Areo because I think he's morally on board with Areo. I think he's like, why are we fighting? Why are we doing this? This is ridiculous. I think it's one of the other reasons why he doesn't push the issue. Um, so then we get to the point where finally Hotah is going to be uh, um, the envoy. And I always thought it was funny that the rainbow banner is such a ridiculous thing for George to have in Ice and Fire, because like what happens when you're fighting people that are not of the same religion as you, which would happen considering that like people worship the old gods, and there seems to have been like a long period of time where the old gods, the Andals and the First Men, like were at war and living in the same area, and eventually being the Andals and their religion kind of conquered. But there would have been thousands of years to have that happen, and they would have been using this rainbow banner as a peace banner. Like it doesn't really make sense. Um, and so this is a little bit of making fun of George, because like we have like Areo Hotah, who doesn't even follow the seven, doesn't even follow the seven. Like him holding this banner would just be like, he'd just be confused. And in fact, this is going to be a problem with like the Ariane chapter, where they go with the peace banner, and Gilbert Faring is a follower of R'hllor. So anyway, I think the rainbow banner is so funny, and I was joking with people about how ridiculous it would have been if they had that in House of the Dragon, like Daemon Targaryen like going down there, and instead of having a big white flag, like is like waving a rainbow flag. People would have just been so confused, you know. And so yeah, hold mirror, he gives away that he's on Balon Swan's horse. uh Gerald Dayne is a smart one. He figures it out. Um, and of course, like Gerald is beautiful, and we get there's a little ambiguity here on Hotah's sexual preference. With him thinking that Gerald is just stunning. Um, and so this line here, you on the other hand worship a black goat. This, of course, is a joke, because in Qohor they worship the black goat, not in Norvos, and Norvos and Qohor like go to war quite a bit. So it's quite a dig on Hotah. And so at first he was going to be a little more anger, like showing his physical anger, but then we figured that like Hotah should be more contained at the beginning, and then maybe lose it as things go on and on. I'm here as an envoy, not an assassin. This actually is some foreshadowing as well to the Ariane chapters, where we've got an envoy who is an assassin. It says, good, you most certainly die. Darkstar has to be super arrogant. You can't match my skill with the blade. And then we get a little background on like that Darkstar like is upset that he was not dubbed Sword of the Morning, and I think we're going to get more into the history of that on our next Hotah chapter. Darkstar fully explaining the full story on how he's robbed of that title, because it's a democracy on who gets to choose Sword of the Morning, and if Darkstar is the best fighter, it should be him, but he doesn't. It's not him, so there's every reason to be upset. By the decree of Doran of House Numeros Mortel, justice shall be dispensed to the false knight Gerald. This is a little bit language from Eddard from Game of Thrones about on this whole order and everything. He says, yes, yes, we stripped of my incomes and lands. Um, and then what can they really offer him? They just offer him that his lands will pass to his kin, and the people in survive in saddle will be will be pardoned, which isn't very much, you know. Um, and so here, like Darkstar is actually kind of clueless on it. He's like, "What am I being accused of? Conspiring with the queen's bitch of a daughter." Um, and then how ridiculous it would be, because this moment, as ridiculous as this moment is, um, you were like Hotah going up to Darkstar and saying you're charged with Ares Oakhart's murder. Like that's going to have to happen, right? Like in George's plan, right? He sent them off under that charge. Like he would have a warrant and everything. Um, like this line here, it's almost like completely unrealistic. Like why would anyone do that? Like, but he has to, right? Darkstar is officially charged with murdering Sir Ares Oakhart. They have to tell him the charge. Like, it's really quite. So that's like straight from George. I think if I were writing this, like, if I was writing a story like this, like, why would I have to be so stupid as to like go and tell Darkstar he's being charged with a murder that he obviously didn't do. Like, why would you send Hotah, the guy who killed Ares Oakhart, on a mission to charge a man with murder with on the murder of Ares Oakhart? It's if if George hadn't done it, it would just be so ridiculous. But George did it. That's why would a character do that? But he did. He did. Um, so it's almost this comical scene. So which is almost why like Darkstar bursts out laughing. Um, and then we have this like story. You'll pay for your violence against the princess. Now, of course, this is we're playing around with whether Darkstar actually went to King's Landing or not for Joffrey's 12th name day. Joffrey's 12th name day, by the way, is the tourney in which Littlefinger lost his dagger, and Tyrion did not. Like everybody thinks that Tyrion got the dagger, but he didn't. He was nothing part of it because he always bets on his brother. So that's the same tourney. So the idea is that Darkstar would have gone to this tourney, and then he would have actually been a bad jousting and not been a tourney knight, and then would have like lost to Boris Blount and would have like remembered what Myrcella was. It's kind of it's a ridiculous story, really. And then Hotah kind of falls for it because he wants to fall for it. I know some people read this Hotah chapter and they're like, wait, is Hotah smart or dumb? Like, would he really believe this? And it's like, we got to understand he like wants to believe. Like this, it's really quite a silly story. Like it is kind of a George story as well. Like, oh, I can see across like a field whether somebody's eyes are blue, which is very George. But like somehow in the middle of a joust, like he would hear Myrcella laughing and like be able to tell whether or not that was Myrcella. Like on the one hand, it's like George's like idea that you could notice all these fine details about people from far away. But on the other hand, it's like a ridiculous story that clearly didn't happen. But Hotah kind of wants to believe it happened, so he accepts it, even though it's not a very believable story. But Boris Blount is, of course, used as the jouster because Boris Blount is called a great jouster by Jorah Mormont when he went to the Lannisport tourney. So he's chosen there, which goes against everything we know about Boris Blount. Boris Blount's supposed to be this, fat, adequate fighter, and it turns out he's like historically one of the best jousters of all time. Like. And so then we get back to the swap. And Darkstar kind of knowing, and actually if you go back to the Queenmaker chapter, Darkstar does like look at the girl in the desert oddly as if he suspects something. So it's not out of nowhere that Darkstar would have figured out the swap. Um, uh, and then I love these little things. Darkstar's personality. To accuse me of murdering a child is vile enough, but I tried and failed. A grave insult to my swordsmanship. This is, editors came up with some great wordsmithing here. And so, obviously this has been my idea for a long time that it was really Sir Andre Dalt, though I guess it doesn't really matter if it's Silva or not. Maybe might end up being, so now that we've revealed that it's Dalt here, maybe it should be Silva later. So, because Silva's going to come up in the Ariane story, so she's going to be part of that. So she's back into the story. So maybe she was the. So I haven't decided if it's going to be Dalt or Silva, but it's clearly not Darkstar. And then some of these lines were added in, like about like shouldn't we really address the fact that Doran like supposedly loves kids, sits in the water gardens all day like looking at kids, being like, I love kids, I care about them so much. It's like, okay, so we added that kind of stuff in there. So this is just some dialogue back and forth about witty dialogue, and then we get into the Blackhaven situation. And so for a long time, I was thinking about like what is it about the Danes, and why would Doran Martell not like the Danes? And it was suggested to me by someone a while back that it probably has something to do with Blackhaven and the Dundarians, like them marrying marchers and them controlling the princess, them controlling the Boneway and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. But we don't actually confirm anything. We just kind of make it all part of Darkstar's story that the Dundarians and the Danes are close, and that this is going to affect so many things politically. But then I was like, well, wait a minute. But if Beric's gone and he's, maybe dead, probably dead, well, we could have Beric have a younger brother, and then he would have to marry Illyria, just like Ned had to marry Catelyn, because that's the tradition. It works perfectly. We just have to invent this character. So for that reason, we invented Bartholomew's Dundarian to marry Illyria in Beric's stead. And then someone brought up the fact that like, but wait, like, isn't the whole reason that Beric could not treat like, so like at the beginning of Clash of Kings, like the Dundarians don't treat with Stannis, and the excuse is that Beric is missing. And it's like, well, if he had a younger brother, wouldn't the younger brother treat? And it's like, well, really, it doesn't matter like who he has. Like there would be some Castellan, there would be some heir. Somebody should have gone and treated with Stannis, and George just didn't want it to happen. So it doesn't really make sense that no one from the House Dundarian treated with Stannis, but nonetheless, like it wouldn't matter if it were a brother versus anybody else. I think the Dundarians just didn't want to treat with Stannis. Like I think they wanted to stay neutral or something. But all of this was discussed. Okay. Darkstar discovers everything. Oh, this is Illyria ruling atop the Palestone Sword. It's kind of like, we're not sure where they would rule, but it seems like the top of the Palestone Sword would be the place. But that's like kind of created. And then we get into the Connington stuff. And there's a lot of discussion about like when we should reveal that Connington got Beware John. Should it be at the end or should it be here, and things like this. So in the end, we had the Beware John here, and then we had more words being revealed later on. So we get this, rather convoluted story of the Danes and the Dundarians being close, and how if the Ironwoods marched past Blackhaven, they would be seen in conspiracy, and then everyone would blame the Danes because of their connection, and Darkstar pretending to be that he was the lover of Illyria and all of this stuff. And it's a purposely convoluted story. Like, it's overly complicated. It doesn't really like um, make complete sense. And I think that's the point. I think like he's supposed to be confusing Areo Hotah and making Areo Hotah feel paranoid about Doran, because Areo Hotah, I think fundamentally he knows that Doran's a bad person, and I think he's always known that Doran is a bad person. Um, but he's just been so asleep in his role as captain of the guard that he doesn't have to think about it. He's just like obey, serve, protect. And so Darkstar messing with Hotah's mind about like what is Doran capable of, and Hotah has to admit that like Doran's capable of anything. Like Doran's capable of all of these complicated evil plans. Like it's all actually very believable to Hotah, because Hotah knows that Doran's not a good person. Um, and so a lot of I did receive some complaints like, wait, this seems like a very convoluted story. Like would Hotah really accept it? And it's like, well, he's it's supposed to be a convoluted story. It's supposed to be something that like a rational person might be like, yeah, I don't know. And he does call it a fable in the end, but we're getting to the point where it's like Hotah, wants to believe Darkstar because he knows Darkstar is innocent. He always knew Darkstar was innocent. He knew that Darkstar didn't kill Ares Okar. He spent weeks on the road like thinking this over. Like, I'm going to accuse a completely innocent man of led by Obara Sand. Like, so he wants to believe Darkstar's stories, which is why I think editors added in like Tyenne's giggle and things like that, to bring back like all these other moments where he kind of sinister planning. This line, you think yourself a scapegoat, I think myself a binder. So there's no word for insurance or anything in Ice and Fire, and the closest we have is binder, which is mentioned I think it's mentioned once in a Tyrion chapter, and it's mentioned once in a Arya chapter. But I guess we added in later, to make the analogy that Prince Doran wouldn't leave port without one, because they're only used in terms of ships. So maybe insurance only exists in terms of ships or whatever. But that's kind of the history of that. So we get back into this like convoluted story of if Ironwood marches past Blackhaven seems complicit, and therefore, but they wouldn't think it was the Dendarians. They would think it was the Danes, and blame the Danes because the Danes are evil. It's I wouldn't it's convoluted, but I will say it's not as convoluted as other stories. Like if you read I think it's Jaime 6, where he has dinner with Roose Bolton, and Roose Bolton tries to explain like the long story of Vargo Hoat and why Vargo Hoat took his hand. It's the most convoluted, ridiculous thing. It goes on for like a full page on why Vargo Hoat cut off Jaime's hand. It's so convoluted. So it's certainly in George's like mind to have these like weird convoluted stories. So then we jump to, you'll be surrendering to me, which I love. I love how the voice of Darkstar like gets serious, and I really liked all of these the dialogue and how it turned out. Why should we do this? And he says, because I have dark wings. For an absurd moment, Hotah saw Sir Gerald gliding through the sky. This is This is of course like a reference to Danny and dragons and people flying in the sky and stuff like that. But this also this idea of like Darkstar flying. There's also like this weird like um kind of homoerotic aspect to Darkstar flying through the sky with wings and like and Areo Hotah being in love with this like angel character. but but it is just like this idea like it's obviously it's like supposed to be one of these cringe lines where because Darkstar's supposed to be cringe, right? So he's got these lines like I have dark wings. um but like Darkstar flying through the sky with wings is just so ridiculous that we had to have we had to have Hotah think about it. um and then this idea that like they would be coming alive inside the prince's past, which would be the same as like Red Wedding and stuff like that. um uh though again it's not necessarily a very believable story. um the And then shooting the messages down, which was I think all the way back in the call from submissions, I mentioned that Sir Balon is the only person that was really skilled enough to take down these ravens. The fact that Sir Balon is such a great archer um, was never ever used, so we got to use it somewhere. It's like this fact about him that he was this incredible archer, and it was he never got the chance to actually shoot anything. Um, it's too bad. And then we get the Darkstars. Innocent as the others. Um, and then we get the line like, "Oh, if you should have in mind to assault while the castle sleeps, remember, I'm deadliest by starlight." That was one of the editors came up with that one. That was I don't think that I don't if we're going for like cringy Darkstar lines, I don't know if we can beat "I'm deadliest by starlight." I think it'll be a competition now to see like how like if you can out Darkstar like a Darkstar line, because like obviously this comes from the fact that like Darkstar's like original lines like "I'm Darkstar and I'm of the night," like kind of stuff. How do we go more Darkstar than Darkstar? I'm deadliest by starlight. Can it get it even more, can it get more Darkstar than that? I don't know. We'll see if we can beat that line, but I don't think you can. I'm deadliest by starlight is like that's just that's like pinnacle Darkstar. I don't know if we can go more. And then we get into Hotah, like what he's thinking about his story. This is very much like Brienne thinking about her story and going through like the memories of all the things she's done, and the people she's met and everything. And so the only thing that I think is kind of interesting is there was some thought about his little princess and the Princess Marcella, and what point is his little princess and Balon Swan's little princess going to be conflated? We do some conflating here about his vows because his vows here at the end, Sir Aerys Oakheart's eyes staring at him, Sir Balon Swan his vows. We're not sure if that's Balon Swan's vows or if that's Areo Hotah's vows. And I thought about a similar stuff with like his little princess. Like, are we talking about Areo Hotah's little princess of Arion, or are we talking about Balon Swan's little princess of Marcella? Or if you even use Aerys Oakhart, like whose little princess would Aerys Oakhart, his little princess would be both. So it's like there's maybe we'll play with it in the future, but there's some it's too bad we didn't get it in there, but it's something I definitely thought about. And then we get to the winter and him thinking about winter. And there's some discussions about because this actually came up in the Elaine chapter, that when winter comes, shouldn't people kind of be upset or sad about it? Like, would it really be celebration? And I think certainly the case in Westeros, but uh, when I personally read the Hotah chapters and I heard about Norvos, I thought of Christmas markets for some reason, you know. So like when I heard about winter cakes and NASA and stuff, I thought about like night markets and winter and Christmas markets and stuff. And a Christmas market is this like celebration of winter, which is an odd thing, right? Like why would you be celebrating these hard months that are coming ahead? Um, and so, but we do, like winter solstice celebrations are a big thing in human society and Christmas markets and stuff like this. So, I really liked the idea that Norvos was kind of like Germany or something with Christmas markets, but we call them night markets and the ringing of bells, winter cakes, and NASA, the yogurt drink. And then of course, like just in case like anybody believed his story, like Darkstar's stories, like Obara Sand, like clearly, like just she hears everything and she's just like, yeah, he's lying. Like it's just not. They're not believable stories. Like he's got the men or the ravens. Um. So this is a question: is Hotah a smart man or not? Um. I think he is a smart man. I think he just wants to believe, but I think we're gonna leaving this open to like reader interpretation. But on like why Hotah like believe like accepted these stories of Darkstar that we're not that believable, and then Obara Sand flat out tells him like, dude, like he's lying to you, um, calling it nonsense, which is true. Uh, and so in the end, she's coughing. We had these discussions about like ellipses and coughs, which is actually kind of a callback to both Robert when he's dying and um, uh, Giles Rosby. Um, and then, him kind of knowing that, like, well, this is what she's always wanted. She wanted war. And so he kind of like finds a reason not to believe Obara, even though Obara is completely correct. Um, and we have this like Hotah finally like morally makes a choice, you know, about something, and then the next morning we get ambiguity. Like, um, is Obara did Hotah kill Obara Sand? Um, did Desil kill Obara Sand? Did she die on her own? Um, Leave that ambiguous. We're not sure if we're gonna answer that later on. Um, can we also just see it as like she's gonna die eventually. She's gonna die. She's maybe she wasn't gonna die in one day, but she was gonna die in three. So it's kind of a mercy. Like, why not just kill her now? You can make that argument and save everybody's life. You're not really like extending out the person's life very much. Um, so then we get the cairn on top of her body as a burial of sorts, a callback to the sand at the beginning, and then Pate of the Shadow City departs with everybody, and then Desil, he kind of goes along things with it because of the it's just easier for him to become a hostage and get sold back than to face Doran and be like, because he doesn't want to die upon those walls, or he has to go back to Doran and be like, yeah, we didn't do what you asked us to do. So it's a lot easier for Desil to become a prisoner and just get ransomed back. Plus, there's this question of whether or not Desil also doesn't want to morally do what's going on here. But then we make it to the castle, and of course um, the ridiculousness of Darkstar coming out with this like plumage like rising high on his helmet, like just ridiculous panache that he would have. Um, but then we get the reveal that I've actually like they have a bunch of old men and sluice gates and stuff like this. There's a discussion of like, is it realistic that he only had 5 men? But the at least in the Sworn Sword, Eustace Osgray only had like two men or something. So it's not out of nowhere that he would have nobody, but it's also that, we kind of established that High Hermitage is on some poor lands, and a lot of the soldiers have gone off for the war, and he's a fugitive, and he could be abandoned by people. So there's a lot of reasons why Darkstar could have nobody, um, not that many people. So he just has old Tom. Um, so children on crates, and um, the Raven. I do think he's lonely. I think I must have been thinking about uh, Jamie's line where he's like, "Don't you see the direwolf?" And he says, I think the direwolf. He looks lonely." I must have been thinking about that. Um, but then the question of the Ravens. The Ravens is kind of funny because yeah, like for a minor little castle like High Hermitage, like no one would want to bring ravens back there. Like, why would they bother? So in a sense, it makes a lot of sense once you kind of like rationally like look at his situation, that they wouldn't get ravens, but at least black ravens. White ravens are easier, right? Because you just don't need as many white ravens as you do black ravens. Like for every black raven, you've got, like, the Citadel would have probably several black ravens to go to a location, and then that location would need several to go back to the Citadel for regular Maester communication. But then every location would need all of the black ravens for what they plan on like communicating to each other with. So like, they probably have a good 2 dozen, maybe 4 dozen like ravens, so they could communicate to King's Landing or the Wall, or their liege lord, or some, like, if they're if they're Blackhaven, like, wouldn't they want to have a raven? Like, as an example, like Blackhaven would need ravens for King's Landing. It would need ravens for Storm's End. Want ravens for Highgarden and Sunspear and all these, and the Wall, and it's just a massive number of ravens when you think about it. Black ravens, but white ravens, you just need like 300, and you've got the whole kingdom covered, because they hardly ever send them out. So it makes sense that he doesn't have any black ravens, but the white raven comes, and so then his only raven is the white raven. Um, Everything was a lie. Illyria Dayne hates him, and then this is like later. We decided, okay, if John and um, Beware is revealed early, then the raven would yell something different this time. So I have him yell wine and marsh. So that's yeah, marsh and wine, to add more into like what slow reveal of what the full message from what the raven is. Um, oh, I missed something I wanted to talk about. Um, during during Darkstar's discussion about dark wings, he says that the word on Raven's wings will be war, and this is a direct reference to, and it's just kind of kind of there as a little joke, but Darkstar doesn't know the code, like the Raven, the Doran's code words, um, but Doran's code words, and I don't think Areo Hotah would know them either, but like in the code, war means wait, and dragon means war, which, and so I was hinting at this being a very funny kind of situation, because even if Darkstar had ravens and he sent them off, and the word on the raven's wings was war, if it was literally war, everyone would view it and go, "Oh, it means wait." And it wouldn't be, nothing would happen. Like, it's kind of this little joke in there, but then it's also to kind of remind people that, well, wait a minute, there's white ravens going out, and one of the words on the white raven we kind of know is dragon, right? So, um, there's some interesting things going on with like the words on dragon's wings. Um, so let's see. Getting back. Yeah, feeding him wine didn't improve the conversation. Trey and Silva had to be one of them. And then where's the real Marcella? How in Seven Hells? And then we get to the last line, where do septas go, which is of course like calling back to um, Septa Eglantine and like where she might have brought Marcella and whether they're gonna and the future of the story there. So I guess going through this, like, yeah, I mean, there's definitely some uh, Easter eggs and everything, but there's not quite as many as I kind of thought there would be. I mean, it's a lot of references to the previous chapter, obviously, but going through, yeah, I mean, we've got our our black oily stones and Dundarian and Dayne kind of history, but I think now that we've got Darkstar in the story, we can go more into Dayne history and kind of slow roll it, because I think I included a line in there about Illyria hating me because the ordeal with Ashara happened years ago. We have to get into what that story was. I do like. So earlier we had this hint. This is another thing I missed when we were talking about the Dayne story, and he mentions John Connington and how John Connington was the lover of Ashara Dayne. That's one of those hints as well. Like, we kind of, as the reader, know that John Connington is gay, so he's not the lover of Ashara Dayne. So it's kind of this like hint early on that Darkstar is just full of shit, like constantly full of shit. Um, I don't know. I think I got most things. I'm sure there's a lot of other Easter eggs that I kind of missed, but I don't know. That's it for now. Anyway, thank you everyone, and I'll see you guys next time.